The dust swirled across the wooden boardwalk as Eliza Harrington stepped off the stagecoach, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang trying to break free. 7 years had passed since she'd fled Canon City, Colorado, 7 years of building a new life, only to be pulled back by a telegram that had shattered her carefully constructed world. Father dying. Come home. Margaret. The year was 1878, and Canon City had changed almost as much as Eliza herself. She adjusted her blue traveling dress, dusty from the long journey, and tightened her grip on her small leather satchel. At 26, she was no longer the frightened girl who had left in disgrace, but a woman who had learned to stand tall despite the whispers that had once chased her out of town. "Miss Harrington," the driver handed down her trunk. "Welcome back to Canon City." His tone was cordial enough, but Eliza caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Canon City might have grown with the booming silver industry, but memories here were as sturdy as the Rocky Mountains themselves. "Thank you," she replied, chin held high as she surveyed the expanded Main Street. New storefronts lined the road, a proper millinery, an expanded general store, even a photography studio where the old blacksmiths had once stood. The railroad had finally reached Canon City, bringing prosperity and new faces, but Eliza knew well enough that some things never changed. As she walked toward the hotel, she could already feel eyes following her, some curious, others hardened with judgment. A woman passed by with 2 young children in tow, pulling them closer as they neared Eliza, as though her past indiscretions might somehow be contagious. The hotel was new, at least. The Canon City Grand Hotel stood 3 stories tall, its wooden facade freshly painted. Inside, Eliza approached the front desk where a young clerk looked up with a practiced smile. "I'd like a room, please. I'm not certain how long I'll be staying." The clerk nodded. "Name for the register." "Eliza Harrington." The young man's pen paused mid-stroke, his smile faltering slightly. "Miss Harrington. From the Harrington place up north of town." "Yes," she said simply, refusing to elaborate further. The clerk recovered quickly, though his eyes now held that familiar mix of curiosity and judgment. "Room 204 is available. $2 per night, meals extra." Eliza handed over the money and took the key, grateful that at least he hadn't refused her outright. Progress of a sort, she supposed. Room 204 was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the bustling Main Street. Eliza set her satchel down and moved to the window, watching the town she'd once called home. She'd need to hire a buggy tomorrow to take her to the family ranch, but tonight she needed to gather her courage. A commotion in the street drew her attention. A man on horseback had stopped a runaway wagon, his strong hands gripping the reins of a panicked horse. Even from her window, Eliza could see his confident movements as he calmed the animal. He wore a dusty brown hat and a sheepskin vest over a blue shirt, his stance unmistakably that of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. As he handed the reins back to the flustered driver, he looked up suddenly, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, Eliza felt an unexpected jolt. She stepped back from the window, drawing the curtain slightly. She didn't come back to Canon City for this, for connections, for judgments, for anything but seeing her father through his final days. Once that duty was done, she'd return to Denver, to the bookshop she'd built for herself, to a life where nobody knew of her past. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Eliza unpacked only what was necessary and prepared for bed, trying to ignore the knot of dread that had settled in her stomach. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and filled with shadows of the past. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the curtains. Eliza dressed carefully in a practical dark green dress with a high collar, her brown hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. She would face Canon City with dignity, regardless of what awaited her. The dining room downstairs was half filled with travelers and townspeople. Conversation dimmed noticeably when she entered, before resuming with a forced casualness that fooled no one. Eliza kept her eyes forward as she took a small table near the window. "Coffee, miss." A young waitress approached, seeming oblivious to Eliza's identity. "Yes, please, and whatever is ready for breakfast." As the girl hurried away, the dining room door swung open again. The man from yesterday, the one who'd stopped the runaway wagon, walked in, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair with just a hint of auburn. He scanned the room briefly before the waitress directed him to the only available seat, the empty chair at Eliza's table. "Madam," he said, approaching with hat in hand, "would you mind terribly if I joined you? Place seems full this morning." Up close, his eyes were a startling blue against sun-weathered skin. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Please," Eliza gestured to the chair, reminding herself that politeness cost nothing and that she'd be gone from this town soon enough. "Much obliged." He settled into the chair. "Name's Flynn Westbrook. I run the Circle W ranch west of town." "Eliza Harrington," she responded automatically, then watched his face for the inevitable reaction. Instead of disgust or judgment, there was only a flicker of recognition followed by a thoughtful expression. "Harrington," he repeated. "Thomas Harrington's daughter?" "Yes." The waitress returned with Eliza's coffee and took Flynn's order. When she'd gone, Flynn continued, "I heard about your father's condition. I'm sorry." "Thank you," Eliza replied, surprised by his sincere tone. "I received word only recently. I've had some business with your father over the years. Good man, fair." He stirred sugar into his coffee when it arrived. "You've been away a while, I gather." "7 years," Eliza said, fighting the urge to elaborate or defend herself. "I live in Denver now." Flynn nodded, not pressing further. "Denver's growing fast. What do you do there?" "I own a bookshop." Pride crept into her voice despite herself. "Small, but it's mine. I've built it from nothing." "That's impressive," Flynn said, and there was no condescension in his tone, only genuine respect. "Takes grit to build something lasting." Their breakfast arrived, temporarily halting conversation. Eliza found herself studying Flynn surreptitiously. He was handsome in a rugged way, perhaps 30 or 32, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands were calloused from work, his shoulders broad from years of hard labor. Nothing like the pampered bank manager's son who had courted her all those years ago, before everything had fallen apart. "You heading out to your father's ranch today?" Flynn asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Yes. I need to hire a buggy from the livery." "I'm heading that direction myself," he offered. "I'd be happy to drive you, save you the expense." Eliza hesitated. Kindness from strangers, especially male strangers, often came with hidden expectations. Yet there was something straightforward about Flynn Westbrook that made her inclined to trust him. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. I've got business that way anyhow." He finished his coffee. "Truth is, the roads have been rough since the spring rains, and that livery buggy has a bad wheel. I noticed it yesterday." Practical considerations won out. "In that case, I accept your offer, Mr. Westbrook. Thank you." "Flynn, please." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him appear younger and even more handsome. "I'll bring my wagon around front in 20 minutes if that suits you." "It does." As he left, Eliza felt a strange flutter of nervousness. Flynn Westbrook hadn't reacted to her name with the usual disapproval. Perhaps he was new enough to Canon City not to know the details of her disgrace. Or perhaps, and this thought was most unsettling, he knew and simply didn't care. Either way, the ride to her father's ranch would reveal which was true. Eliza finished her breakfast and went upstairs to gather what she needed for the day, preparing herself for the homecoming she had both dreaded and, in the deepest corners of her heart, longed for. Flynn's wagon was waiting when Eliza emerged from the hotel. It was well maintained, pulled by two sturdy bay horses. Flynn himself stood beside it, helping her up with a steady hand before climbing up himself. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion, and Canon City began to fall away behind them. "Beautiful country," Flynn commented as they followed the road north. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, the late spring bringing a touch of green to the rugged landscape. "Do you miss it?" "In Denver?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted. "Denver has its charms, but there's something about these mountains that stays with you." They fell into companionable silence for a while, the wagon rolling steadily over the rutted road. Eliza's thoughts turned to her father, wondering what she would find at the ranch. The telegram from her sister had been brief, giving no details about his condition beyond that it was grave. "May I ask how long you've known my father?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "About 5 years now," Flynn replied. "I bought the old Peterson place when I came to Colorado. Your father helped me get established, gave me fair prices on some cattle to start my herd, advice on which grazing land to lease." "That sounds like him," Eliza said softly. Her father had always been fair in business, even when his personal judgments could be harsh. "Have you seen him recently?" Flynn's expression sobered. "About 2 weeks ago. He's changed since the illness took hold, thinner, but his mind is still sharp." Eliza nodded, absorbing this. "And my sister, Margaret, she's still running things." "She is. Married Walter Jenkins 4 years back. They live at the ranch with their son." So Margaret had the husband and child that Eliza had once thought would be her own future. The irony wasn't lost on her. Flynn cleared his throat. "Miss Harrington, Eliza, I should probably tell you that I know about why you left Canon City." Eliza stiffened, her hands clutching her reticule more tightly. "I see, and yet you still offered me a ride." "The past is the past," Flynn said simply. "A person shouldn't be judged forever on one chapter of their story." "Canon City doesn't share your philosophy, Mr. Westbrook." "Flynn," he corrected gently. "And maybe some don't, but people can surprise you. 7 years is a long time." Eliza turned to look at him directly, searching for any hidden mockery or judgment in his expression. She found none, only a steady, clear gaze that met hers without flinching. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked bluntly. Flynn considered this for a moment. "I believe in giving people a fair chance. Whatever happened back then, it's clear you've built something meaningful with your life since. That bookshop you mentioned that took courage and determination." "It did," Eliza agreed, thinking of the countless hours, the scraping together of every penny, the nights spent sleeping on a cot in the back room until she could afford proper lodgings. "Besides," Flynn added with a slight smile, "I've never been one to put much stock in town gossip. I prefer to form my own opinions." They were approaching the turnoff to the Harrington ranch now, the familiar landscape bringing a rush of memories, some sweet, some painful. Eliza recognized the old oak tree where she'd spent countless hours reading as a girl, the creek where she and Margaret had waded on hot summer days, the distant hill where she'd had her first kiss at 16. "What exactly did you hear?" she asked suddenly, needing to know which version of her story had reached his ears. Flynn's hands tightened slightly on the reins before he answered. "That you were engaged to the banker's son, Edward Prescott. That there was." Trouble. That he broke the engagement when he discovered you'd been meeting another man secretly, that your father sent you away to avoid further scandal. Eliza gave a small, bitter laugh. A sanitized version, then, convenient for the Prescotts. It's not the full story. No, she took a deep breath. Edward broke our engagement when he discovered I was with child. His child. He accused me of infidelity to cover his own guilt, knowing his father would never approve of him marrying a girl who'd given herself before marriage even to him. When I insisted the baby was his, he claimed I was trying to trap him into marriage with another man's child. Flynn's jaw tightened visibly. And your father believed Prescott over you. My father believed what was convenient to believe, Eliza said, the old pain surfacing despite her efforts to keep it buried. The Prescotts were influential. Edward was to take over the bank. A scandal would have damaged their standing in the community. What happened to the child? Flynn asked quietly. Eliza looked away toward the distant mountains. I lost the baby during my 3rd month in Denver. The journey, the stress. The doctor said it was not uncommon. She swallowed hard. I wrote to tell my father, but he never responded. Only Margaret sent occasional letters, and even those were guarded. Flynn was silent for a long moment. Then, softly but with unmistakable conviction, he said, "Your past is not your prison, Eliza. Not unless you allow it to be." The words, simple as they were, struck her with unexpected force. In 7 years, no one had ever expressed such a sentiment to her that she might be more than the sum of her mistakes, real or perceived. That's a kind thought, she managed finally. But Canon City has a long memory. So make new memories, Flynn suggested as they turned onto the long drive leading to the Harrington ranch house. Show them who you are now, not who they remember. Before Eliza could respond, the house came into view, a substantial 2-story structure of weathered wood and native stone. It looked smaller than she remembered somehow, yet fundamentally unchanged. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a woman stood on the front porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun, Margaret. As the wagon drew closer, Eliza could see that her sister had changed her once slender frame now more matronly. Her hair pulled back severely in a style better suited to a woman a decade older. When they stopped in front of the house, Margaret's expression was a complex mixture of relief and wariness. "Thank you for the ride, Flynn," Eliza said softly, gathering herself for the reunion ahead. "I'll be back this way tomorrow," he replied. "If you need anything before then, send word to the Circle W." Eliza nodded and allowed him to help her down from the wagon. As her feet touched the familiar ground of home, she felt both terrified and strangely hopeful, a combination she hadn't anticipated when boarding the stagecoach to Canon City. Margaret descended the porch steps slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Eliza, you came." "Of course I came, Maggie." "He's our father." Something in Margaret's face softened at the use of her childhood nickname. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Eliza agreed, closing the distance between them. After a moment's hesitation, she embraced her sister, feeling Margaret's initial stiffness give way to a brief, tight hug. "How is he?" Eliza asked as they separated, failing quickly. "The doctor doesn't think he'll last the week." Margaret glanced at Flynn, who was still sitting in the wagon. "Thank you for bringing my sister, Mr. Westbrook." "My pleasure, Mrs. Jenkins. Please give my regards to your husband." As Flynn drove away, Margaret turned back to Eliza. "Come. Father's been asking for you." Inside, the house smelled of pine soap and the medicinal scents that accompany long illness. Margaret led Eliza upstairs to their father's bedroom, pausing outside the door. "He's very weak," she warned. "And he may say things that don't make sense. The fever sometimes confuses him." Eliza nodded, steeling herself. I understand. The man in the bed barely resembled the robust, stern father she remembered. Thomas Harrington had always been a commanding presence, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice carrying across the ranch with authority. Now he lay withered against the pillows, his once thick hair wispy and white, his skin stretched thin over prominent bones. "Father," Margaret said gently, "Eliza is here." The old man's eyes fluttered open, the same deep brown as Eliza's own, and focused slowly on her face. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "My girl, you came back." "Yes, father," she said, moving to the bedside chair and taking his frail hand. "I'm here." "Good, that's good." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Need to tell you, should have believed you." Eliza felt her throat constrict. "Father, you don't need to know, listen," he insisted, his voice strengthening momentarily. "Prescott Boy confessed, years after, drunk at the saloon, bragging." He coughed, the effort shaking his thin frame. "Tried to find you, letters came back." Tears stung Eliza's eyes. After she'd lost the baby, she'd moved 3 times before finding permanent lodgings above what would become her bookshop. Her letters to the ranch had always been sent from her current address, but she'd never received any in return, not from her father, at least. "It doesn't matter now," she said, though it did terribly. "Does matter," her father insisted. "Did you wrong, girl, my own daughter? Pride, too much pride." His eyes drifted closed for a moment, then opened again with visible effort. "Forgive an old man's mistake." "I forgive you," Eliza whispered, meaning it despite the years of hurt, the loneliness, the struggle to build a life from nothing. He seemed to relax slightly at her words. "Your mother would have believed you. Always said you had her honest heart." Margaret moved to the other side of the bed, adjusting the blankets with practiced motions. "Father needs to rest now. The doctor will be by this afternoon." Eliza nodded and squeezed her father's hand gently before releasing it. "I'll be here, father. I'm not going anywhere." Outside the bedroom, Margaret sighed heavily. "He's been like this for 2 weeks, better moments and worse ones. Sometimes he doesn't recognize me at all." "What happened?" "The telegram didn't say." "Pneumonia, the doctor thinks." It started as a simple cold, but he wouldn't rest. Insisted on riding out to check the north pasture during that cold snap in April. Margaret led the way downstairs. By the time Walter found him in the barn, coughing up blood, it was too late to do much but make him comfortable. In the kitchen, a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. Margaret poured 2 cups and gestured for Eliza to sit at the worn wooden table, the same one they'd eaten at as children. "I should have written sooner," Margaret admitted, "but I wasn't sure you'd come after everything." "He's my father, Maggie. Of course I'd come." Margaret's gaze dropped to her cup. "The town hasn't forgotten, Lisa. People still talk." "I gathered as much from the reception at the hotel." "Flynn Westbrook doesn't seem bothered by it," Margaret observed, a hint of question in her tone. "Mr. Westbrook has an unusually charitable view of past mistakes," Eliza replied carefully. "He's a good man," Margaret said. "Honest. Works that ranch of his from sunup to sundown. Walter says he's the fairest businessman in the county." Before Eliza could respond, the back door opened, and a small boy of about 3 burst in, followed by a tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Mama, Papa found a frog by the creek," the child announced excitedly, then stopped short at the sight of Eliza. "Thomas, this is your Aunt Eliza," Margaret said, drawing the boy closer. "She's come to visit Grandpa." The child regarded Eliza solemnly for a moment before offering a shy hello. "Hello, Thomas," Eliza replied, struck by how much he resembled Margaret at that age, the same serious eyes, the same thoughtful expression. Walter Jenkins stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome home, Eliza. We're glad you could come." His sincerity seemed genuine, though Eliza detected a certain wariness in his eyes. Still, it was a warmer welcome than she had expected from her brother-in-law. "Thank you, Walter. I appreciate the telegram." Little Thomas tugged at his mother's skirt. "Can I show Aunt Eliza my horse?" "Your horse?" Eliza asked, smiling despite herself. "It's a pony, really," Margaret explained. "Father gave it to him for his 3rd birthday, though Walter does most of the actual handling." "I'd love to see your horse, Thomas," Eliza told her nephew. The boy beamed. "He's spotted. His name is Captain." "A fine name for a horse," Eliza agreed. As they all moved outside to the small corral where a patient Shetland pony grazed, Eliza felt a strange mixture of emotions. This was the family life she might have should have had if things had gone differently. Yet seeing her sister settled, her father making peace with the past, her nephew's innocent excitement, perhaps there was still room for healing, even after all this time. Flynn Westbrook's words echoed in her mind, "Your past is not your prison." Looking at her nephew's joyful face as he proudly showed off his pony, Eliza allowed herself to wonder if that might actually be true. The next several days fell into a rhythm of caring for Thomas Harrington, helping Margaret with household chores, and getting to know her young nephew. Walter, though initially reserved, gradually warmed to her presence, especially after hearing from Margaret that their father had finally acknowledged the truth about what had happened 7 years ago. Flynn Westbrook appeared each afternoon, ostensibly to discuss ranch business with Walter, but inevitably finding time to speak with Eliza as well. Their conversations ranged from books Flynn was surprisingly well read for a rancher to the changes in Canon City, to Eliza's life in Denver. "You never married?" Eliza asked him on the 3rd day as they walked along the creek that bordered the Harrington property. The question had been on her mind, though she'd hesitated to ask it. Flynn smiled slightly. "Came close once, back in Texas." Catherine Belmont, daughter of the biggest rancher in the county. "We were courting when her father decided to move the family to California. She chose California over me." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. He shrugged. "It was for the best." Catherine wanted a certain kind of life, parties, fine clothes, society. "I've always preferred simpler things." He glanced at her. "What about you? Anyone special in Denver?" "No," Eliza admitted. "After everything that happened here, I focused on building my business." Relationships seemed too complicated, too risky. Flynn nodded thoughtfully. "Understandable, though it seems a shame a woman like you alone." "A woman like me?" Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Smart, determined, beautiful," Flynn said simply, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. The compliment, delivered without artifice, made Eliza's cheeks warm. "Mr. Westbrook, are you flirting with the town scandal?" "Just stating facts as I see them," he replied with a small smile. "And I thought we'd agreed on Flynn." They'd reached a large oak tree, its branches providing welcome shade against the afternoon sun. Eliza paused beneath it, turning to face him fully. "Why are you really here every day, Flynn? It can't all be ranch business." "No," he admitted. "It's not." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "The truth is, I find myself thinking about you when I should be focusing on fence posts and cattle tallies. I'm drawn to you, Eliza. Your strength, your resilience. The way you face this town with your head held high despite everything." Eliza felt her heart quicken. "You hardly know me." "I'd like to know you better," he said simply. "If you're amenable." Before she could respond, a call from the house interrupted them. Margaret stood on the porch, waving urgently. "It's Father," Eliza said, already gathering her skirts to hurry back. Flynn fell into step beside her, his longer stride easily matching her hurried pace. Inside, the doctor was just leaving Thomas Harrington's bedroom, his expression grave. The end is near, he told them quietly. Hours, not days. He's asking for you both. Eliza and Margaret exchanged a glance before entering the sick room together. Their father lay even more diminished than before, his breathing shallow and labored. Walter stood at the foot of the bed, little Thomas held carefully in his arms, the boy's eyes wide and confused at the solemnity around him. "My girls," Thomas Harrington whispered as they approached. "Both here." "We're here, Father," Margaret assured him, taking one of his hands while Eliza took the other. "Good family," he murmured. "Should have known better, should have kept you together." "It's all right," Eliza said gently. "We're together now." His eyes, clouded with pain but suddenly alert, fixed on Eliza. "The ranch," he said, his voice strengthening momentarily. "Half yours, always was. Will says so." Eliza glanced at Margaret in surprise. Her sister nodded slightly, confirming their father's words. "Don't worry about that now," Eliza told him. "No, listen," he insisted. "Made mistakes, tried to fix. Late, too late." A rattling cough shook him. "Be happy, girl, find someone worthy, not like that Prescott boy." "I will, Father," Eliza promised, tears blurring her vision. Thomas Harrington nodded weakly, then turned his gaze to include Margaret. "Proud of you both. Tell your mother." His voice faded, his eyes drifting closed for a few moments. There was only the sound of labored breathing in the room. Then, quietly, peacefully, that too stopped. Thomas Harrington was gone. The following days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and condolence calls. To Eliza's surprise, many of Canon City's residents came to pay their respects, including some who had been quickest to condemn her 7 years before. Some offered genuine sympathy, others seemed more curious than grieved, but all were respectful. Edward Prescott was notably absent, though his father came briefly, looking uncomfortable and leaving quickly. Flynn was a constant presence, helping Walter with the practical matters that death necessitates, bringing food from town that neighbors had prepared, offering quiet support to Eliza without intruding on her grief. After the funeral, as they stood in the cemetery overlooking the town, Flynn finally asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Will you stay in Canon City now? Your father mentioned the ranch." Eliza looked across at Margaret, who stood with Walter and little Thomas near the fresh grave. "I don't know. The ranch is half mine according to Father's will, but I have my bookshop in Denver. My life is there." "A bookshop can be sold," Flynn suggested carefully. "Or perhaps Canon City could use a bookshop of its own." The idea caught Eliza by surprise. She hadn't considered the possibility of staying permanently, of reclaiming not just her inheritance, but her place in the community that had rejected her. "I'm not sure Canon City wants me back," she said honestly. "I want you back," Flynn replied, his voice low and certain. "And I think you'd be surprised by how the town would respond if you gave it a chance. People change, Eliza, some faster than others, but they do change." A week after the funeral, Margaret and Eliza sat at the kitchen table, going through their father's papers. Walter had taken little Thomas fishing, giving the sisters space to talk privately. "He amended his will 3 years ago," Margaret explained, showing Eliza the document. "After Edward Prescott's drunken confession became known. Father tried to find you then, sent letters to your last known address in Denver." "I'd moved by then," Eliza said. "The building where I first rented a room was sold, demolished for a new bank. He hired a man to look for you, but the trail went cold." Margaret looked down at her hands. "I should have tried harder myself. I'm sorry, Lisa. You had your own life, Maggie, a husband, a child on the way. Still." Margaret reached across the table, taking Eliza's hand. "We were sisters before all that. I let you face everything alone." The simple acknowledgement, years overdue, broke something open in Eliza's heart. Tears came, and with them, words that had been bottled up for too long about the loneliness, the struggle, the loss of her baby, the slow rebuilding of a life from the ashes of scandal. Margaret listened, sometimes crying with her, sometimes offering the comfort that Eliza had needed so desperately back then. When the storm of emotion finally passed, both women felt lighter, as if a long-standing debt had at last been settled between them. "What will you do?" Margaret asked finally. About the ranch, Eliza had been considering this question for days. "I won't take half the ranch from you, Maggie. This is your home, your life. But perhaps a smaller arrangement. What are you thinking?" "Father owned that parcel by the river with the old Johnston cabin, doesn't he? About 40 acres, Margaret nodded. "It's part of the ranch, yes. We don't use it much. It's too far from the main house to be convenient." "What if I took that as my share?" "It's near town, and that cabin could be fixed up." Eliza hesitated. "I've been thinking about what Flynn said about Canon City perhaps needing a bookshop." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "You're considering staying?" "I'm considering it," Eliza admitted with a small smile. "The shop in Denver is successful enough that I could sell it for a good price. Enough to start fresh here, renovate the cabin, build a small shop in town." "But the gossip, the judgment, can you face that every day?" 7 years ago I couldn't, but now." Eliza thought of Flynn's steady presence, his belief in her, his insistence that the past need not define her future. "Maybe it's time to find out if I'm stronger than the whispers." The next day, Flynn drove Eliza out to the river parcel. The Johnston cabin was in better shape than she'd expected. The roof needed work, and the chimney had partially collapsed. But the walls were sound and the location was beautiful, set on a gentle rise overlooking the river. "It would take work," Flynn acknowledged as they walked through the two-room structure. "But it has potential." "Like me," Eliza said with a wry smile. Flynn laughed. "You're well beyond potential, Eliza Harrington. You're a force of nature." They stepped outside, where spring wildflowers dotted the meadow sloping down to the river. In the distance, the mountains rose majestically against a perfect blue sky. "I could be happy here," Eliza said softly, almost to herself. "Is that what you want?" Flynn asked, watching her carefully. "To be happy here." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close he stood, how his eyes reflected the blue of the sky above them. "I want not to be afraid anymore, not of the past, not of what people think." "And what about the future?" Flynn's voice was gentle. "What do you want from that?" "I'm still figuring that out," Eliza admitted. "But I think I want to find out if there's a place for me here after all, if I can build something new without running away." Flynn took a step closer. "There's definitely a place for you here, Eliza. Several places, in fact." "Oh, and what might those be?" "Well, there's that shop in town you're considering," he began, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "There's this cabin with a view that rivals anything in Colorado, and then, she prompted when he paused. "And then there's a place at the Circle W if you wanted it." His expression grew more serious. "I know it's fast, too fast probably, but I've never been a man to hesitate when I know what I want." Eliza's heart beat faster. "And what is it you want, Flynn Westbrook?" "You," he said simply. "Not today or tomorrow, but someday when you're ready. When you know that I see you for who you are now, not for what happened before we met." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. No man had spoken to her with such honesty since before her disgrace. Certainly none had offered a future, knowing her past. "I can't promise anything yet," she said carefully. "There's too much to consider, too much to resolve." "I'm not asking for promises," Flynn replied. "Just possibility. A chance to court you properly, once you're settled. To see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, could grow into something lasting. Eliza looked out at the river, glittering in the afternoon sun, then back at the man before her, steady, patient, his eyes holding nothing but warmth and possibility. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like that chance very much." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, and when he took her hand, his touch was gentle but sure, like the promise of a future neither of them could yet fully envision, but both were suddenly eager to explore. 2 months later, Eliza stood in the doorway of her newly opened bookshop on Canon City's Main Street, watching as Flynn hung the wooden sign bearing its name, New Chapter Books. The symbolism hadn't been lost on anyone, least of all the townspeople who had initially regarded her return with suspicion. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been whispers when she'd first announced her intention to stay, to open a business. Some of the older residents had been openly disapproving, but others, including, surprisingly, the banker Mr. Prescott, had been supportive. Whether from genuine regret over his son's actions or from a businessman's pragmatic acceptance of a new enterprise, he had approved her loan application without hesitation. Edward Prescott himself had left Canon City years ago, married to a banker's daughter from Denver, reportedly unhappy despite his wealth. Eliza felt no satisfaction in this news, only a vague sadness for the young man she had once thought she loved, and for the child that had never had a chance to live. "Perfect," Flynn declared, stepping back to admire the sign. "What do you think?" "I think it's the finest bookshop sign west of the Mississippi," Eliza replied, smiling as she joined him on the boardwalk. The store itself was small but welcoming, with shelves Flynn had built himself and a reading area with comfortable chairs near the front window. "Grand opening tomorrow," she added. "Are you nervous?" "Not at all," Flynn said confidently. "Half the town has already been by to peek through the windows. The Ladies' Aid Society is planning to make your first book club selection their official reading. And I've seen at least 3 ranchers' wives drop hints to their husbands about those romance novels you've ordered." Eliza laughed. "And here I thought Canon City was a town of stern moral judgment." "Oh, they'll still judge," Flynn acknowledged with a wink, "but they'll do it while reading the latest from back east, thanks to you." Their courtship had progressed steadily over the summer months. Flynn was a patient man, never pushing, always respectful of Eliza's need to establish herself independently before considering a deeper commitment. They rode together on Sundays, dined together several evenings a week, and Flynn had become a regular visitor at the river cabin, which was now nearly completely renovated. "Dinner at the hotel tonight," Flynn suggested as they walked back inside the shop. "To celebrate your last night of freedom before becoming Canon City's preeminent businesswoman." "I'd like that," Eliza agreed. "Though I should check on the last shipment of books first. They're supposed to arrive on the afternoon train." "I'll come with you to the station," Flynn offered. "Those crates are heavy." As they walked arm in arm down the main street toward the train station, Eliza was acutely aware of how much had changed in such a short time. Where once there had been sidelong glances and whispered comments, now there were friendly nods, even warm greetings. Not from everyone. Some wounds ran too deep, some judgments too entrenched, but from enough people to make Canon City feel, against all odds, like home again. "Flynn, Miss Harrington," Sheriff Davis called from across the street, hurrying over to them. "Glad I caught you. Got a telegram from Denver I thought you'd want to see right away." He handed Eliza a yellow envelope. She opened it with a slight frown, then broke into a smile as she read the message. "It's from Mrs. Holloway, the woman who bought my Denver shop," she explained to Flynn. She sent the final payment early, with a note saying business is better than expected. That's wonderful news, Flynn said, genuinely pleased for her. It means I can order those children's books we discussed, Eliza told him excitedly, and perhaps expand the reading area a bit more. Sheriff Davis chuckled. Never seen anyone so happy about buying more books. But then my Marjorie's the same way, can't visit your shop often enough these days, checking when it'll open. Tomorrow morning at 9, Eliza assured him. And please tell Mrs. Davis that I've set aside that novel she was asking about. As the sheriff tipped his hat and continued on his rounds, Flynn gave Eliza a knowing look. You've won him over completely. 2 months ago, he could barely look you in the eye. His wife did most of the convincing, I think, Eliza admitted. She visited me at the cabin one day, told me she'd never believed the rumors. Said her sister had gone through something similar back in Ohio. People surprise you, Flynn observed, echoing what he'd told her on that first wagon ride to the ranch. At the train station, they collected the shipment of books, 3 heavy crates that Flynn and the station manager loaded onto Flynn's wagon. As they were about to leave, a familiar figure appeared on the platform. Eliza, Margaret called, hurrying toward them with little Thomas in tow. I thought that was you. We just came in on the train from Pueblo. The sisters embraced warmly. In the months since their father's death, their relationship had blossomed anew, healing old wounds and building new connections. What were you doing in Pueblo? Eliza asked, kneeling to greet her nephew with a hug. Doctor's visit, Margaret replied, then lowered her voice with a meaningful smile. It's confirmed we're expecting again, come spring. Maggie, that's wonderful, Eliza exclaimed, embracing her sister again. Have you told Walter? Sent a telegram ahead. He's meeting us here shortly. Margaret glanced at Flynn, who was securing the crates on the wagon. And how are things with you two? Eliza felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Good, very good. He's been patient, understanding, and completely smitten, Margaret added with a knowing look. Walter says he talks about you constantly when they're discussing cattle business. Before Eliza could respond, Flynn rejoined them. Everything's loaded. Hello, Margaret. Did you have a good trip to Pueblo? As Margaret shared her news, Eliza watched Flynn's genuine delight for her sister and brother-in-law. He was a good man, the best man she had ever known. Patient, yes, but also principled, hard-working, and possessed of a quiet wisdom that continued to surprise her. Watching him with little Thomas, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders to the child's delight, Eliza felt something settle within her, a certainty that had been growing steadily over the summer months. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner at the hotel with Margaret, Walter, and little Thomas, Flynn walked Eliza back to the river cabin. The night was cool but clear, the stars brilliant above the silhouetted mountains. A good day, Flynn commented as they strolled along the riverbank path. Your books arrived, your sister's expecting, and Mrs. Holloway's payment came through. Seems like everything's falling into place. It does, doesn't it? Eliza agreed, her heart suddenly racing with the decision she'd made during dinner. Almost as if the universe is giving its approval, Flynn glanced at her curiously. Approval for what? They had reached the cabin, its windows glowing warmly with the lamp Eliza had left burning on the porch. She stopped, turning to face Flynn fully in the moonlight. Flynn, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected, you've been patient with me, more patient than I had any right to expect. Eliza, no, please let me finish, she insisted gently. When I came back to Canon City, I was certain it could never be home again, that the past would always define me here, that I could never find happiness in a place that had once caused me so much pain. She took a deep breath, reaching for his hands. But you showed me another way. You said my past wasn't my prison, and you were right. These last months building the shop, rebuilding my relationship with Margaret, finding a place in this community again, none of it would have happened without your belief in me. Without you. Flynn's eyes, even in the dim light, were intensely blue and focused entirely on her. I just reminded you of what was already there, Eliza. The strength, the courage that was all you. Perhaps, she acknowledged with a small smile, but you gave me a reason to find that courage again. And now? And now, he prompted when she hesitated. And now I don't want to wait any more, she said simply. Whatever you were planning, however long you thought we should court, I'm ready now, Flynn, for whatever comes next, for us. For a moment, Flynn stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then slowly, reverently, he raised one hand to touch her cheek. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I've known since that first day when you were standing at that hotel window watching me wrestle that runaway wagon that you were the one I'd been waiting for. I just didn't want to rush you." "I'm certain," Eliza affirmed. "More certain than I've ever been about anything." Flynn's smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Without another word, he drew her close and kissed her a kiss that held all the promise of their future, all the certainty of having found, against all odds, exactly where they belonged. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips when they finally parted. "Not someday, not eventually, soon as you're ready." "Yes," Eliza answered simply. "Yes to all of it." The following morning, as Eliza prepared to open her bookshop for the first time, she stood behind the counter, surveying the neatly arranged shelves with pride. The bell over the door jingled and Flynn entered, carrying a small package. "I know you're not officially open for another hour," he said, "but I couldn't wait to give you this." Curious, Eliza unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages creamy and blank. "For your new chapter," Flynn explained. "I thought maybe we could write it together." Touched beyond words, Eliza reached across the counter to take his hand. "I'd like that very much." As if on cue, the bell jingled again as Margaret and Walter arrived with little Thomas, followed by Sheriff Davis and his wife, then the milliner from across the street, and gradually, a steady stream of townspeople, some whom Eliza had known all her life, others she was just getting to know. They came with small gifts, with congratulations, with book requests. Some offered awkward but sincere apologies for past judgments. Others simply browsed the shelves, exclaiming over titles they'd heard of but never had access to before. By 9 o'clock, when the shop officially opened, it was already filled with customers and well-wishers. Standing amid the cheerful bustle, Flynn's solid presence beside her, Eliza felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never expected to find again in Canon City. The past hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it had been transformed, integrated into a present filled with purpose and a future bright with possibility. Later, as the initial rush of customers finally began to ebb, Flynn leaned close to whisper in her ear, "See, not a prison after all." Eliza smiled, thinking of all they had overcome and all that still lay ahead. "No," she agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "Not a prison, a beginning." 3 months later, on a crisp November day with the mountains outlined in fresh snow, Eliza Harrington became Eliza Westbrook in a simple ceremony at the Harrington Ranch. Margaret stood beside her as matron of honor, Walter beside Flynn as best man. Little Thomas carried the rings on a small pillow, his face solemn with the importance of his task. The guest list surprised Eliza, not just close friends but townspeople from all walks of Canon City life. The banker Mr. Prescott came, offering quiet congratulations and a wedding gift of crystal candlesticks. Sheriff Davis and his wife brought a handmade quilt. The Ladies' Aid Society provided an elaborate wedding cake. Even old Mrs. Thornton, who had once been among Eliza's harshest critics, pressed a lace handkerchief into her hands with tears in her eyes and whispered, "We were wrong about you, dear. So very wrong." After the ceremony, as they greeted their guests beneath a canopy of autumn-colored leaves, Flynn kept Eliza's hand firmly in his, as if afraid she might somehow slip away. "Happy?" he asked during a rare moment alone. "More than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "Though I still can't quite believe all these people came to wish us well." "I can," Flynn said confidently. "You've shown them who you really are, Eliza, not who they thought you were, but who you've always been: strong, compassionate, determined." "We've shown them," she corrected gently. Together. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing in the Harringtons' barn, Eliza found herself watching her new husband with a sense of wonder. Flynn moved easily among their guests, laughing with the ranchers, discussing books with the schoolteacher, bouncing little Thomas on his knee. "He's a good man," Margaret said, joining her at the edge of the makeshift dance floor. "The kind of man who makes everyone around him better." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "I got lucky." "Not luck," Margaret countered. "You earned this happiness, Liza, after everything." When Flynn claimed her for another dance, whirling her among the lantern-lit shadows of the barn, Eliza felt as though her heart might burst with joy. This was what second chances looked like: not the absence of a past, but the promise of a future rich enough to encompass it all. Later that night, as they rode in Flynn's wagon to their new home, not the river cabin, which Eliza had decided to keep as her private retreat, but the main house at the Circle W Ranch, Flynn told her about his plans for their future. "I've been thinking about expanding the herd," he said, his arm warm around her shoulders against the night chill. "Maybe trying some of those new breeding techniques the agricultural college is promoting. And there's that south pasture that would be perfect for horses if we wanted to diversify." "It sounds ambitious," Eliza commented, leaning into his embrace. "Well, I've got a wife with a sharp business mind now," Flynn pointed out with a smile. "And a bookshop owner at that. Between your books and my cattle, we'll build something lasting." As the ranch house came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows where Flynn's foreman's wife had prepared for their arrival, Eliza felt a surge of gratitude for all that had led her to this moment, even the painful parts, the mistakes and misunderstandings, the years of separation from her family and home. "Your past is not your prison," Flynn had told her that first day, and now she understood the full truth of those words. The past wasn't something to escape or deny, but to acknowledge, to learn from, to integrate into the person she had become. Flynn helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Westbrook," he said softly as he set her down in the warm, lamplit entryway. "Home," Eliza repeated, the word filled with more meaning than she could express. "I like the sound of that." 1 year later, Eliza sat in the rocking chair on the front porch of the Circle W Ranch house, her 3-month-old son Thomas Flynn Westbrook sleeping peacefully in her arms. The summer afternoon was warm, the scent of wildflowers drifting on the gentle breeze. From her vantage point, she could see Flynn in the distance, riding back from checking on the new calves in the north pasture. His figure was unmistakable even from afar: strong, confident, at home in the saddle and on the land they now shared. The past year had brought changes both expected and surprising. The bookshop was thriving, managed 3 days a week by Eliza and the rest of the time by Mrs. Davis, the sheriff's wife, who had revealed an unexpected talent for bookselling. The Circle W had expanded its operations, with new breeding stock and a small but growing reputation for quality horses as well as cattle. Margaret had given birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, named for both Eliza and their mother. The cousins would grow up knowing each other, their bond already apparent in the way little Thomas watched over his baby cousin with solemn protectiveness. Most surprising of all had been the letter that arrived from Denver 6 months after the wedding from Edward Prescott, of all people. He had written not to apologize exactly, but to acknowledge the truth of what had happened between them, to inform Eliza that his marriage had failed, that he was seeking redemption of a sort by funding a home for unwed mothers in Denver. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, which was just as well. Eliza had found that forgiveness had come to her gradually, not as a conscious decision but as a natural outgrowth of her own happiness. She had shown the letter to Flynn, who had read it thoughtfully before handing it back. "Will you answer him?" he had asked, no judgment in his tone. "I think so," Eliza had replied. "Not for his sake but for mine, to close that chapter completely." She had written a brief, polite response, wishing Edward well in his charitable endeavors, sharing news of her marriage and the bookshop. His reply had been equally cordial and distant. They were not friends and never would be, but the exchange had helped lay the final ghosts of the past to rest. Now, watching Flynn dismount at the corral and hand his horse over to one of the ranch hands, Eliza felt a profound sense of contentment. Their son stirred in her arms, his tiny face so like his father's in repose. Flynn spotted them on the porch, and his face lit with a smile that, even after a year of marriage, still made Eliza's heart beat faster. He strode toward them, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, bending to kiss her before gently touching their son's downy head. "Waiting for you," Eliza replied with a smile. "Little Thomas just woke up from his nap." As if on cue, the baby's eyes fluttered open blue like his father's, and he regarded Flynn solemnly before breaking into a toothless grin of recognition. "There's my boy," Flynn said softly, taking him from Eliza's arms with practiced ease. "Did you help your mama with the account books today?" "He did," Eliza confirmed with a laugh, though his contributions mostly involved trying to eat the pencil. Flynn settled into the chair beside hers, their son cradled against his chest. "I ran into Walter on the way back. He says Margaret's planning a picnic by the river this Sunday after church. The whole family." "That sounds wonderful," Eliza said, watching her husband with their child, still sometimes amazed by the simple domestic happiness they had found together. The sun was beginning to set, painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Another day ending, another beginning just hours away. This was their life now, not perfect, not without challenges, but rich with love and possibility. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Flynn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Eliza smiled, reaching over to take his free hand in hers. "I was just thinking about something you said to me the day we met, about the past not being a prison." Flynn nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I remember. You were right," she told him softly. "But what I didn't understand then was that the future isn't a promised escape either. It's what we're building right now, day by day. This moment, you, me, our son, this home we've made together, this is what freedom really looks like." Flynn's eyes, warm with understanding and love, met hers. "I couldn't have said it better myself, Mrs. Westbrook." As the last light of day gilded the world around them in gold, Eliza Harrington Westbrook felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones, not an ending, not even a new beginning, but the continuous, miraculous unfolding of a life reclaimed, a heart healed, a love that had proven stronger than judgment, stronger than the past, stronger than all the forces that had once threatened to keep them apart. The past was not her prison. And the future, their future, was as boundless as the Colorado sky above them, stretching endlessly toward tomorrow.